500 years ago, he washed ashore the sole survivor of a shipwreck. And upon the skull of the man who killed his dad, he said, I'm mad, I must eradicate piracy, injustice and cruelty, and all my sons will follow me, so evildoers will believe that this man cannot die.
The Phantom,
the ghost who walks,
the Phantom,
enemies beware, the Phantom's always there, but you won't find the Phantom. He finds you.
G'day everybody, and for those who've come in late, you're listening to Expand the Phantom podcast. This is episode 152, which is a comics and news one. I am Jermayn, and tonight, or today, as you are probably listening to this, I am joined by Dan. How are you?
Very good, Jermayn. Very good. It's it feels like it's been a while since between podcasts, just the way that the recording schedule has gone, and it's good to be back talking Phantom again.
Yeah, it's been probably about 5 podcasts since we've done the comics and news. And obviously life is a little bit different with COVID-19, and then we've had Kickstarters starting, and then we've had the awesome opportunity to interview some people as well, which have kind of thrown some of our schedule, but that's life, you know.
Yep.
We've both got our health, so as we are recording this, the world is currently in a COVID-19 pandemic. So we hope everyone is coping, everyone is staying safe, everyone is doing their bit to try and stay safe. Now we do want to give a bit of a quick shout out to a couple of creators who we've been in touch with, whose family members have suffered from COVID-19 and have been in hospital with various means of the sickness. So Ewan Nicole and Henrik Solstrom, big shout out to you guys in Ireland and Sweden, whose family members have suffered from that. Have you had any sicknesses related to you in any way, Dan?
No, we've been very lucky in Australia, and we've talked about this in the chat about how Australia, with a little bit more advance notice than a lot of other countries, and our geographical advantage, I guess, we have in this situation, have been very, very lucky. And I know WA, we've joked about this, about how WA is always wait a while. Well, waiting a while has helped, and I know that you guys are particularly, it sort of got to you guys last, and you're reasonably unaffected over there, Jermayn. But we're very lucky in Australia to have it as good as we have. Yes. And the economic downturn is probably going to be the big one for us. And everyone is affected by that, and we would both know people who have lost their jobs or are hanging on to their jobs just through government assistance at the moment. And so, again, we're blessed to be in a country that has the opportunity to provide that sort of assistance for people, and we hope that everyone who's listening to this is coping as well as they possibly can. And life's tough for all of us, but we'll get through it.
Well, it looks like it's been tough for you, mate. It looks like you've cut back on the shaving, saving a few dollars on shaving upstairs. So
this is, and I guess anyone who's watching the YouTube can see that I do usually shave my head, but on the very last day when the kids at my school, I'm a teacher, when the kids left, they joked in my class that no matter how long we were on quarantine, there's no way I'd grow hair. And so I said, challenge accepted, and I haven't shaved since. And this is what I've been able to produce. So hopefully they get back soon, because it's hot and uncomfortable. I don't know how you people with hair do it.
I suppose you've had more experience than a lot of us with. But now, yeah. So let's just hope that the next hour and a half will be a bit of fun, and those who are listening, or those who are stuck in isolation, or are in a challenging situation, they can just have a bit of fun. So, because that is, we all love the Phantom, and let's have some fun. So we'll get straight into it. So, on that same topic, Supanova Sydney, and Perth, or let's focus on Sydney basically, is pretty much an Australian Mecca weekend. We joke about it. I've been going for about a decade now. And I think this would have been your third or fourth time.
This year would be my fourth, yeah.
And so, it's a big weekend for a lot of Australian fans. And so Supanova have just recently made an announcement that they're going to be pushing the weekends, which is Sydney and also Perth, back in August. Now, that it's interesting, and following some of the chatter on that is rather interesting, as people are looking forward to it, are hoping that it goes ahead, and then you get those that are, whether you want to call them more realistic or more pessimistic, they have something different to say. So I actually had a chat with my wife about this today, and so if Sydney goes ahead, I won't be going, purely because where my wife works, she works in a school and stuff like that, and so she's asked if I can be a little bit more responsible and not expose myself to a possible situation over in Sydney. So I won't be going. I'm going to let her remember that I'm doing this for her. So when I buy something later on, I can use that as leverage.
I feel like you might have already bought the thing that is going to be the leverage.
I've got a few things in the file. So what about yourself, Dan?
Look, I think it's good on them, on Supanova, I guess, for clinging to the faith that they might be able to do it. But I've got to say, it seems really ambitious and really optimistic on their part. And there's probably all sorts of financial wheelings and dealings behind the scene that mean that they've got to make this sort of announcement rather than a cancellation. But gee, it's hard to see it going ahead. We're a long way away from having gatherings of more than 500 people. How quaint that rule seems to be now, back 6 weeks ago when they said we're not going to do that. It just seems really hard to think how it's possibly going to go ahead. You've mentioned schools. I'm a teacher. My wife's a teacher. There's no way that, you don't want to get stuck in a border quarantine situation either, because we're both in states with closed borders. So, no, it's off the table for me. So it sounds like there'll be no Chronicle Chamber representation at Supanova this year if it does happen to go ahead. But honestly, it feels really ambitious to think that it might.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I think there's some legal reasons why they have to do it. That's me reading into it. And like you, I'm pleased that they haven't just said, no, that's it, we're not going to do it. They've kind of put their foot down and said, no, we're going to do our best to get this going. Because for a lot of people, and we've joked in the past, but for a lot of people, this is a big weekend. Some people are only allowed out of their house once a year, and this is probably it. But I'm not sure if you saw it before, but I've joked that I don't know how social separation will work in a place like Supanova.
No.
We'll be able to follow rules, especially when they can't even follow basic hygiene rules of washing their hands after going to the toilet and putting on deodorant. I don't know how the masses will be able to cope with a 1.5 meter distance between each other.
Yeah. Look, I haven't had the experiences that you've had maybe a decade ago, what Supanova used to be like. I've never found it that bad, but certainly the crowding is immense, and there's just no way, I would have thought, unless you halve the stalls, and maybe they will halve the stalls because you're not going to be able to have international guests come in. I can't see the international borders opening to let international guests in. Yeah. So it just... Yeah, I don't want to use the word pipe dream, but then I just did. So, yeah.
So,
anyway, Good luck to them.
Good luck to them. Along with the Supanova Sydney, there's usually the Olympic dinners, the Lee Thorpe Memorial Bengala Explorers Club dinners. Now, we have not heard back. Richard and Antonio, the organisers of that, have not done an email notifying people of what's going to be happening of that since Supanova have made their announcement for August. So again,
but just prior to that, they did say that it seemed really unlikely, and that it was a tone of cancellation, wasn't it? So really hard to see it going ahead. I can't see how it could possibly go.
Which is sad, but at the end of the day, everyone's safety is more important. So I guess if or when it gets cancelled and all that, let's just try and be positive or upbeat, and not try and be, too negative and too jumping on people.
Yeah, correct. Let's make Supanova 2021 and Lee Falk Memorial Bengala Dinner number 31 or 32, whatever next year's is, be the best one yet.
Yeah, exactly. So moving on. So now I'm exhausted. I'm tired. I had a rough sleep last night and not much sleep. Now, I'm assuming you probably had the same you're probably the same for exactly the same reasons, and that is because we were silly enough, or maybe smart enough.
It turns out silly enough, but that's okay.
To stay up to 11 p.m. for me and 1 a.m. for you to sign up for the new Kickstarter campaign that started as we were recording last night. So it's been an exciting last 24 hours. Again, by the time we're recording. So for those who have come in late and you've been hiding behind a rock, or you've just come out of isolation and you decided to turn on your iTunes account as well, Mikael Lyck, who's a Swedish fan and one of our friends of Chronicle Chamber, who does our reviews of comics, who you will hear again soon, has done a Kickstarter campaign for a Phantom card game. Now, we've done podcasts on it, we've done articles on it, we've got around the time this gets released, there's going to be a article with a game demo. There's other game demos and other reviews and stuff. And so, the good news is, at the status of the time of recording, it has been fully fledged.
It is funded. We're up. It's done. It's purchased. It's done.
Yes. So if you've signed up, you now have to basically pay for it. So
make sure there's money in the bank account at the end of May.
Yeah, and you get your excuse ready for the missus when she asks, "What's all this money coming out?" So have you?
But the good thing about it is, it's not all that much money. And I was thinking about that today in terms of the difference in terms of the experience of following the Kickstarter between this and the Phantom board game. The Phantom board game, there was a lot of tension in the last, 48 hours or so, just hoping it was going to get across the line and was going to get funded. And then it did comfortably in the end because of that last minute rush, which Dale and Alex said or hoped would come. And it did. This one is completely different. So it was fully funded, 100% funded in 15 hours after the launch. And so now the chase is on for stretch goals, which is pretty exciting.
And then as we've recorded, we've already done our first stretch goal, which is better card stock. And we believe there are another 6 that have already been planned. We don't know.
I'm looking forward to our next chat with Mikael to see how much he's prepared to tell us about what they might be.
Yeah, on the Kickstarter campaign, they do kind of let you know of a couple. So go onto the website, have a look at the next couple. But apparently there's 6 others after the one that's already been pledged. Now, I'm assuming you've pledged?
Yeah, absolutely. I was one of the suckers who stayed up, well, as you said, till 1 o'clock last night. We know we were messaging each other in the countdown, waiting for it to drop. I was very keen to get one of the signed prints of Henrik Solstrom, the cover of the box, and I just didn't want to wake up this morning and miss out on that. Now, as it turns out, as I said before, maybe that was silly because currently, even though the game's fully pledged, those signed prints are still available, whether you want the purple or the blue. And
it's about 15 to 20 of each of the purple and the blue. So
it's still available.
Yeah. So out of 100, there's about, there's just under half maybe that are.
Yeah, and obviously those are being picked up by the Phantom collectors. The game players are just getting the plain game, which is fantastic, or the deluxe game with the extra cards, and it's really apparent that this has landed well with the card game playing community, because that's what's got it funded so far. It would seem to me, just with the numbers, and I haven't looked in the last probably 4 or 5 hours, but there was only 30 odd Australians who had pledged at that time 4 or 5 hours ago, even though it's fully funded. So it would seem to me that the Phantom collectors perhaps haven't jumped on board yet, but it's more the game players who have. Yeah, which is a marked difference, I think, from the board game as well.
Yeah. Probably the other 2 differences between the board game campaign and this one, or maybe 3, is for, and it's a different beast, like the price difference. So, like for instance, the base of a board game was basically $90 to $100, and they had to get 51,000.
Yep.
You know, it's $40, maybe $50 once you include postage to get this, and
to get the base sort of set,
and it's 15,000 for a fully pledge. Now, when you think about what needed to be done to be able to create it, that's understandable. The other one would be is that there's a lot more Swedish fans that have jumped on board of this than what they were in the board game as well. So that's another big difference. Is I think from memory we were looking at about 10% of the board game pledges were Swedish, and then they're the highest number at the moment. They're about 30% or something like
by streets. Yeah,
which is so. That's another interesting thing as well. So there's a couple of little interesting things, and and they're different. One's a card game, one's a board game, but the analytical side of me does do all the comparisons, and I'm sure there's other people out there that are comparing and stuff like that as well. So it's fun. I'm looking forward to the stretch goals, and hopefully we can learn about those soon.
Now let's put our cards on the table. Pardon the pun. You are famous for your Scandi bent, if I can say that. In terms of you do like the Scandinavian side of the Phantom. Did you order a blue Phantom box or the purple?
I ordered both.
Correct collector's answer.
and that's the completest side of me, where you know. And to be honest, and this probably wouldn't come as a surprise, but I did actually prefer the blue version over the purple. I just felt that the blue popped more against the red background than the purple, which didn't pop and wasn't that contrast as much. Yeah. So if I had to stick to one, it would have been the blue one.
Yeah, no, fair enough.
All right, so while we're in Sweden, let's talk about the fact that in one of the last, I think it was 2 issues ago, they did their announcement for the best Fantomen story. Now, this was some interesting results, and we've got an article on the website and stuff like that, so have a bit of a look at it. Now, there's 3 things I really wanted to kind of touch base on, or maybe 4. The art has been a little bit different in some of the stories that won. There was 2 newspaper stories in the top 5, and I think there was 4 in the top 10, which is quite a good representation. I think from memory, that's a better representation than the Frew results from last year as well. So that's interesting. And then the 22nd Phantom Saga didn't do as well. Now, that's either the story wasn't good, which we will talk about later, or the fact that it was broken up into four stories, and that's the reason why you've kind of got four votes, or votes spread over 4 stories. So do you remember the article? Do you remember having a look at the results and anything jumped out of mine?
Look, the things that jumped out at me were probably the things that you've just mentioned about the newspaper stories being so highly regarded. Obviously, a huge congratulations to Mikael Sol for writing the story that ultimately topped the charts, if you will. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but we haven't actually seen that published in a Frew yet.
That's correct.
Nice. Yeah. So, clearly, if it's that popular, I'm looking forward to reading it. Yeah. I suspect, in the same way that the Australian Best of Frew 2019 results had a strong Australian flavour, maybe there's some patriotism behind the reason why that one polled so highly. But also, clearly it's a quality story as well. So I'm looking forward to reading that. But yeah, it was the strength of the dailies that and the Sundays stories that really piqued my interest and showed that clearly there is still that appetite for those, dare I say it, more traditional stories that Tony DePaul, Mike Manley, and Jeff Weigel are pumping out.
Yeah, no, definitely.
And the Nomad A Reckoning with the Nomad, obviously was really popular, and so it should be. It was a really good story, and we've discussed that extensively in past podcasts, and people can go back and check that out.
Yeah, definitely. No, I enjoy it. It's good to have a look at it. Now, some other news, jumping continents out of Brazil. So there's been a new phantom sculpture. You've had the opportunity to talk to the sculpture. Do you want to fill us in a little bit on that one?
Yeah, so Fabio Colt's his name, or whatever the pronunciation of Colt is in Brazilian. Sorry, Fabio. It's not a licensed product, which we should say up front, because a lot of people, that's very important for a lot of people. And I would say I certainly prefer licensed products above unlicensed products. But, gee, it's a great sculpture. And the images that we're seeing of it, whether it's painted grey or red or blue or purple, and all of those options are available, the customer can choose. Look pretty stunning, and so I can certainly understand why there's interest in it. He's gone very limited in terms of the numbers that he's producing, 50 total, and that isn't 50 purple and 50 red. That's 50 total sculptures that the customer can then decide what colour they'd like theirs to be. So it's going to be a very limited piece, and it's good to see someone having a crack at it. From the interview or the messenger chat I had with him, and I should say up front, and a lot of people I think who are querying some of the posts he puts on Facebook, there's a language barrier there for sure, and I think people need to be understanding of that when they're in conversation with Fabio. There is certainly a language barrier, but look, he's enthusiastic. I'm really excited for the fact that he's got plans for another couple as well, and looking forward to seeing what they look like.
You mean small designs, not another bust type of thing? So that's what you mean, right?
Yeah, no, he's got 2 more sculptures planned.
Yeah,
not a bust as such. One, both dioramas is what he phrased them as, and one will certainly include the skull cave. So
cool. No worries. So now just one last bit of news before we jump into the comics, and that's about our Bushfire books. Again, just a bit of a report. When it's all finished, we do want to do a nice article kind of explaining everything and stuff like that. But we've still got about 20 odd books left. So if you've been umming and ahhing, you might not want to delay because you will miss out.
I think I'll just hold it up here too as a bit of a shameless promo. I think there's literally 23, 24 books left. And so, yeah, as you say, if you've been on the fence about whether you want to buy this one or not, now's the time, because we're not going to do reprints. This is it. I'm really proud of the fact that we've been able to raise so much money, and I know you'll go over the figures in a moment, but at a time when the world is completely consumed by COVID, I'm really proud of the fact that we're still sort of ticking away and contributing to the bushfire appeal, because that was horrendous at the time, and people may have forgotten that a little bit now.
Yeah. But
it was horrendous at the time, and the effects are ongoing, and COVID has only made it worse for the people who were affected. So if you're, I'm just really proud of the fact that we're still sort of ticking away and helping the people who were affected there.
Yeah, definitely. So over $25,000 has been raised, and that's through the book sales, but also through the sales of the art. Now, we've still got one piece of art that we need to faffle. We haven't forgotten about that, but purely with things that are going on at the moment, and Dan's will talk so you can have a look at that if you're watching it on YouTube. But with the things that are going on, we've just kind of held off for a little bit, and we want life to get back to normal a little bit, and then we'll faffle it in some one way or the other. So do you just want to talk?
Right. Yeah. So just holding that up again, I don't know I've showed this in a previous podcast, but that's the Keith Williams piece that appeared in the book. And we will, of course, make sure that is faffled in some way or funds are raised out of it. So that little the $25,000 figure that Jermayn has just said, we'll just give that a last minute boost with this, perhaps as a part of the celebration of selling the last of the books whenever we.
Yes.
Yeah.
Awesome. So thank you for everyone for either contributing or purchasing your copy. So what we'll do is we will jump over to the comics. So we're going to hear from Mikael. Now, Mikael's the man of the moment at the moment with his
Isn't he?
with the Kickstarter campaign. So, Mikael, over to you, buddy.
Today I will be talking about 3 issues, number 8, 9 and double issue 10, 11. For you YouTube viewers out there, my copy of number 8 might look a bit different. That is because it never arrived, so this is just a blank piece of paper, but I've read the story through the digital app Flip. It has a cover by Rafael Ruiz, another one of those ghost reimaginations that we talked about in an article on Chronicle Chamber. The main story, The River That Disappears, is written by Janne Lundström and art by Bertil Wilhelmsson. It's published first in 1970 and it's never been translated to English. It features an underground cave connected from a whirlpool that has this mythos created by the natives that it is a giant that sucks in the water and swallows those unlucky who ends up there. And in the second act there are some roughnecks that steal ivory from the villages around the river that leads to this whirlpool. And at one point Diana believes that the Phantom is dead, but I will not spoil if he really is dead or in case you get the chance to read this. I enjoyed this story. It's much better than all the earlier Wilhelmsson stories we have read this year. And the other story is The Mission by Falk and Berry, published 3 times in Fantomen prior to this. Once again, they chose the black and white version. In the beginning of this story, Rex is out looking for the Phantom. He travels from the Skull Cave via Whispering Woods, Phantom's Head Peak, Eden, and ends up in Kilauea, and it seems like it's an afternoon. Sometimes that distance seems a bit longer, or maybe that's just me. In the plot, the third richest man in the world takes a liking for Diana Palmer and pulls some strings to get her on a mission in Bulana, the country he rules over. Lily is of course delighted of this, and the Phantom gets a mission from Luaga to find out someone that is embezzling supplies worth many millions of money. He does not really know who is behind it, but luckily some roughnecks jumps him so he can beat them up and get some information from them. That information leads him to another guy who also needs a bit of the old rough on roughnecks, and then he finds out who the real culprit is. Yeah, for me this is a standard Barry, and that is good. Still not happy with the chosen version of it, and would rather see something that's not reprinted as many times as this one. Next up is issue 9 2020 with a cover of Luca Arbata. It really looks cool, but is there some weird perspective, or is it just my mind? Because it seems like wouldn't Devil be super big if that's on the top of this dam? Well, it still looks great. It starts off by presenting the outcome of the best story vote. We went through this on the homepage, but in case you're coming in late, the winner was The Devil in Stockholm. I thought that was a good adventure, but maybe it's because it was in Stockholm and I live in Stockholm. If you want to know more about that, you can check out the Chronicle Chambers article. Then we have the story, and that's Dizzying Affairs, written in 1978. It's never been translated to English, and it's done by Donne Avenel and Özkan Eralp. This time it's in blazing colors. This story is about an evil, greedy corporation called Webb, and they have the same logo as the Singh pirates have in the Billy Zane movie. Let's see if I can find it quickly here. Here it is. Maybe not the exact same logo, but it's a bit similar at least. And it happens a lot in this story. The Phantom destroys Webb's properties one by one until he uses his cunning to solve the bigger issue. He could have saved so much by doing that right away, I guess, but it happens a lot. It's much action, and it's a mixed bag. full of action and quite fun things, but the dialogue is out of the world. People scream and speak everything they know in such a unnatural way. For example, we have this flight attendant that presents the person the bad guy will sit next to with his title and research area, and there's another guy who is trying to stop the bad guys and gets in a sprint, and then when he's sprinting for his life, he's screaming what he has to do to close down the operation. It just felt unnatural, but I guess it's more for the reader and for the Phantom to understand what he needs to do. And more than once it felt like a lecture. It could have been a bit more subtle in the anti-big business statements. And lastly, we have the double issue 1011, The Secret Theatre Part 2, Shakespeare in Venice by Claes Remerti and Kari Leppänen, with a cover of Luca Arbata. I think this is a great cover. I really like it, even though the Phantom is not a big part of it. The color and the eyes, really good. The story is mostly about this astronomer who believes that the church is wrong and science is right, and then it also is about William Shakespeare, but there's not many panels of the Phantom in it. Phantom is really not in the... I hear this when it's some fighting, but mostly it's other people doing stuff. And I think the story is really interesting, and I really liked the villain in this story arc. But as I said earlier about this kind of historic adventure, that feels like Phantom is more of an afterthought. And can it really be a great Phantom story when it feels like the Phantom doesn't have anything to do in the story? And that's up to the readers, I guess. Then we have The Mysterious Stranger, Falk and Barry adventure. Bank robbers that hide on a cruise ship. The Phantom finds out, take a chopper to the ship, and saves the day. It's a good story. Barry Falk is usually good. Too bad I read it a few times before, and those times I think I read it in color. And then we have a preview of the next issue. It will feature The Revenge of the Drummer, a 1983 Team Fantomen story written by Norman Walker with art by Knut Westad. And another Barry Falk story, The Hostages. I think they should have published The Drummer of Timpani, because then you would have both stories connected, but they probably had good reason for not doing it. That's all from me. Happy Phantoming.
I'm just so disappointed that Mikael didn't just tell us about the Kickstarter. It's a bit of a shame given he recorded all of that days before the Kickstarter launched.
Yeah. But no, jokes aside, huge thanks for doing that while you're doing all the last minute preparations for the Kickstarter. So there was the 3 issues, and so we're really thankful for that. So what we'll do is we'll jump over to the Frew publications. Now we're going to do things a little bit differently, purely because, as some people will know, we are currently in the 22nd Phantom Saga parts. So we've had part 1 at the time of recording, then we've had a collector's replica, and then there's part 2, part 3, and part 4 to come as basically you were listening to this. And what we wanted to do is we thought we'll review all the other comics, and then we'll wait for these to go, and then we'll do a special podcast on those 4 parts. And I think it's going to be a rather interesting one, because there's some interesting developments out of just the first issue. So it's going to be interesting. Now, if you are a little bit unsure about what's gone on and you can't remember what happened in the first 3 parts, on the website there or on YouTube, there's a 10-minute wrap-up of basically the first 3 parts that we've just done a bit of a video, a bit of a diagnostic or whatever you want to call it. So if you're not sure and you don't want to dig out the issues, just jump on there, have a bit of a listen and a watch, and then maybe that might help you as you jump in. So what we'll do is, like I said, we'll talk about 22nd Phantom Saga later. But what we're going to do now is we're going to go all the way back to the past, and we're going to dig out issue 1862, which is Inked in Blood Part 1 by Peter Anderson and Jason Paulus, the artist. And it also had The Heart of Darkness, Chapter 7, Part 1. So, Dan, do you want to kick us off telling us about Part 1?
Oh, sure. I probably had thought we were going to talk about Ink in Blood 1 and 2 together, and I'm sure a lot of this conversation will merge as we go.
Right, well,
but
what we'll do is we'll do that, and then issue 1863 is Inked in Blood Part 2. That's the comic there. And then that also had another Heart of Darkness, which is Chapter 7, Part 2 as well. So again, by the same creative team. So Dan, do you want to kick us off with some of your thoughts of Inked in Blood Part 1 and Part 2, and then we can go from there.
For sure. And I'm just going to give us a shameless plug because, as Jermaine has shown you, those are the two comics, and at the back page of both of them is the ad for the Bushfire appeal book, which remains, I think, for both of us, a pretty cool moment where we've had something we've produced appear in a Frew fandom comic. So
what I like,
just a quick mention of that.
What I liked is that we kicked off the Free Games advert into the black and white, and we got the full colour. We had a bit of a laugh with Dale about that.
And we must say a huge thank you to Dudley and Glenn and Renee for donating that advertising space as well, because again, in terms of raising money and keeping our costs down, for them to advertise that free of charge, thank you very much to Frew and the crew.
Exactly. So what do you think of the story?
All right. Yes, so the story, I quite enjoyed it. It's a really fast-paced read, and particularly, I guess, the start of the double-parter, the fact that there's... I was really taken by the fact that there's so little dialogue for the first 3 pages of Part 1. I think there's 2 speech bubbles in the whole of the first 3 pages. Sorry, there's 3 speech bubbles, but one of them is actually in a comic, and I'll get to that in a moment. So there's only 2 speech bubbles in the story in the first 3 pages, and that was a really interesting way to start. We often hear from when we have our interviews with creators, whether they're writers or artists, about the way that they want the pictures to tell the story, and that was done really effectively here, I thought. So that was really good. The story is really quite fast-paced. There's action every second or third page, and it's constantly moving, constantly shifting, and the way that it sets up at the end of the 22 pages for a bit of a what comes next, it really does leave you on tenterhooks for the next part, which I thought was quite cool. So that was well-structured and well-written, I thought.
That's the problem with the Frew comics now coming out once a fortnight, is that when you get a part like this, you've got to wait another 2 weeks.
Well, I've learned my lesson, and I didn't read Part 1 until I already had Part 2 in my possession, so I knew I could just pick it up and keep going. Yeah.
Now, one question before I go into it is, in the Golden Eagle, which we reviewed in episode 148, the Phantom, and this was a sticking point between the 3 of us, actually. We all had the varying opinions on it. The Phantom borrowed, and I use the word borrowed in little things.
As in kicked the rider off?
Yeah, he borrowed a motorbike. Now, in this, in Inked in Blood Part 2, he borrowed a motorbike as well. Now, do you feel as... I don't want to use the word outrage because it's probably a little bit dramatic, but do you feel the same... I can't think of the right word, but did you kind of have the same feeling as what you did in the Golden Eagle as what you did in this one?
No, I didn't at all, because in Golden Eagle, there was just a motorcyclist riding past, and the Phantom Fly kicked him off and then took his bike, and we had no inclination about who the cyclist was. It could have been just Joe Public riding past. It wouldn't have been too hard, I would have thought, to set that up as a bad guy, and so therefore you go, okay, fair enough. Phantom's.
So what about a cop?
Him. No, well, it's different because the cop's over having a hamburger, or a hot dog, ordering a hot dog, and the Phantom quite clearly just doesn't have to punch him or kick him off his bike. He just walks over and goes, well, I'm just borrowing your bike, and he's using it for law enforcement purposes. So, you know, I'm very comfortable with that's in the fine Phantom tradition of, commandeering vehicles to be able to do what he needs to do. The issue within the Golden Eagle was
the kick?
The kick against potentially a very innocent bystander.
So it's not so much the stealing the motorbike that upset you, breaking the law, where in a sense this is probably even worse because it's a government property and you're stealing something from the policeman, which means he can't do his job, i.e. he can't save someone or something like that. It's the fact that he kicked him that upset you more.
Well, I guess I am a motorcyclist and I've got my own bike, and the last thing I want as I'm cycling down the road is someone to just fly kick me off my bike. I've got nothing to do with it. So if the policeman's off having a hot dog and not saving the innocent party, then by all means, the Phantom should use the equipment to do it.
Yeah, okay. So, but I reckon he probably broke more laws in this story than what he did in the Golden Eagle, because then he also ruined police cars in the car chase as well. So,
that was their fault. They didn't have to go up that ramp.
So I raise all of that because it was a bit of a discussion that we had, and then like the next issue, there was another one, and then I had a feeling that it wouldn't have been as. And I take your point about the kick and stuff like that, but I just thought it was interesting that,
Yeah. As I said, the Golden Eagle just needed a one frame to demonstrate that or one dialogue bubble or something would have made the motorbike rider a bad guy, and so therefore all good.
Justifiable.
Absolutely.
All right. So, no, I had to raise that. I had a good chuckle when I read that. I thought, I can't. Look, I even wrote it down because I didn't want to forget about it.
I have no doubt.
Because I wanted to ask you that question in the podcast. Now, the thing that I found interesting about this story is, we've talked about this several times, is about stories that could be condensed into one part or could be fleshed out, I guess, to be two parts. Now, I reckon this was one of those stories that has been fleshed out to become two stories. And one of the reasons why I say that is because Jason's using huge panels. Like, if you're looking at it, like, this is probably one of the, on page 17, like, that's probably one of the more condensed pages, and there's still only 5 panels on there. And then if you compare that to, say, like an Egmont or a Team Fantomen story, there's a lot more panels per page than what Jason has done on here. So I reckon this has been a story that's fleshed out. Another point that I reckon this is because if you look at the last 2 pages of the story, where you've got
part 2,
where you've got what's her name? It's Maud. What's the wife's name?
Maud, yeah, that's right.
So, she's trying on the clothes, which is 2 pages, and it's fun, but it's kind of like, it's, to me, that's another indication that it quite possibly was a fleshed out a little bit to get to 2 pages. Now,
look, there's no doubt that the last 2 pages are an epilogue, if you like.
3 pages.
No, I think the last page, if we're looking at page 22 of part 2, that could be the end. Could comfortably be the end of the story. The last 2 pages, 23, 24 of part 2, are definitely like that. That it's an epilogue. It's the end of the story that sort of ties the whole thing together. It makes him, and I don't mind it. I'm not in love with the character of Maud in this instance. Like, it's, I'm glad that's not Diana who's doing that, because it wouldn't fit the character of Diana. But it's Maud, and maybe that's what she was like, and that's okay. It gives us that insight into the Phantom as a human character as well, not just a superhero. So that's the sort of thing that makes the character more real, and that's the sort of thing that appeals to me, I guess. It makes him different from other characters.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with it there. I just see it as a way of kind of stretching the story to fit 2 pages.
Yeah, I think it serves a very valid purpose, and I wouldn't call it just a stretch. I think it's a good use of that extra pages.
Yeah, fair enough. Now, I'm going to, maybe it's because I didn't get much sleep last night, and I'm a little bit crankier, but I enjoyed the first part, but the second part I did not enjoy. Now, and I have reread it twice to ensure that it wasn't, that I didn't, just wasn't the time of the month for myself. It was, that I wanted to give it a proper go. Now, Peter Anderson knows the Phantom, and I don't think this was his best work, and I don't say that lightly, because I know he's going to listen to this as well, and I know he will message me once he listens to this. Now, in my opinion, this story has the potential, but there's just a few little things that could be polished a little bit better. Like, I'll just look at page 10. So you got the Phantom
Of which book?
Of part 2. So you've got
Okay.
so you got the Phantom being scary and stuff like that. Like this, and whether it might not just be the writers, maybe the editor probably should have identified this as well. But this would have been a good opportunity for an old jungle saying to be included in there. And so there was just like those little things there that are just, and as a school teacher, you would know, you have stuff that's passable, but then there's that little bit of care that just lifts something from, to something really, really good. And I just felt that this both parts just lacked that little bit of polish that could have made it a better story than what it is. And again, I feel like I'm just being a negative Nelly, but some panels of the art I really, really enjoyed. And I enjoyed, like this one here, there's a whole heap of, it looks like the spirit, and there's that style and stuff like that. But
so that's the splash page on page 1 of part 2.
Yeah, but then there's just some, or even this one on page 4 of the same one as well, where you've got the half the page of the Phantom reading comics at the bottom of the bar and stuff like that. So there's some great panels in there, but then there's just some panels that I really didn't like, and like this one here. On this is again part 2, page 12, where the Phantom's tying up the bad guy. There's no detail of the Phantom's face; it just coloured it all in, and it just. And I understand that there's a shadow and all that, but it just seems like there was some panels and there was some instances that there wasn't that care about it, and because it had potential to be a good couple of comics, a good couple of stories, and it lacked just that polish to be able to make it a good story, in my opinion.
Oh, look, if I address your points in turn as I remember them, the old jungle sayings is a bit of a bugbear of mine. I think that's having the old jungle sayings is a really easy tie through for writers to bring the 85 plus years of history through the Phantom. And I think that for whatever reason, modern writers and editors do seem to miss the opportunities to have old jungle sayings in it. And I agree. Off the top of my head, and without going back and rereading it again, I don't think I remember a single old jungle saying across this entire 2-part story. And there should be, in a Phantom comic, there should be old jungle sayings. That's part of the tropes. That's part of how we recognise that it is the Phantom. So really, I would think that Phantom writers, if you want to aspire to write a Phantom comic, should almost be looking for ways to include old jungle sayings and probably paring yourself back, making sure you don't do too many. Anyway, that's certainly not just Anderson at the moment. That seems to be something that's been happening for many years.
But I also reckon partly of the blame needs to be at the editors as well, because they get it, and they get it before it goes to print. And they should be going, ooh, let's stick an old jungle.
This is the moment.
This is the moment that when the Phantom speaks, you listen, or what type, the Phantom can freeze the blood of tigers, or there's all those different types of old jungle.
As far as I know, there's something like 150 old jungle sayings that have been created, and we've seen in the last, I'm going to say, 2 to 3 weeks, Tony DePaul has created a new one in the newspaper strip. Now that's his prerogative, and from my point of view, the ones in the newspaper stories are the only ones that count, of course. So I'm only counting when I say 150, I think that's from the newspaper stories. Now I would almost have two A3 posters above my desk if I'm the editor, going of just all of those old jungle sayings. Now, where can I work these in, and how can I mix these up and use ones that haven't been used heaps before, and that sort of stuff.
And all it takes is putting 1 or 2 in a story.
Yeah, correct. So look, we're absolutely nitpicking if we're looking at old jungle sayings, but it's a classic trope of the character, and we'd love to see more of them used so that we continue to have that differential between this and every other comic book character. The
other reason why I think things like that are important is because of the argument that we have, and a lot of the time we play it up and stuff like that because it's a bit of fun. But there are people that are very staunch in the way they read it, and if it's not Lee Falk, it's not Phantom. And so the old jungle sayings are just one of those things that can help keep the old fuddy-duddies happy.
Yeah,
because it's like, there's an old jungle saying, I remember reading this story which had this jungle saying. So it fills them
connection.
There's the connection, gives them all nice, warm, fuzzy feelings, and there's a bit of fun, and that's what comics should be about. So it was just one of those things, and maybe I'm expecting too much from some writers and editors, but and I know Peter Addison is a Phantom fan, and he's read Phantom comics longer than what I have.
Yes.
And maybe I hold him on a higher level than others, but sorry, mate, but I expect more from him.
A little bit. Let's have some hashtag OJS in the next story.
We're so going to get a message.
Yeah. Now, you also mentioned Jason Paulus's art, and I will also be the first to admit that not every page of Jason's art is for me. Aesthetically, I probably grew up on a different Phantom. I grew up on Cy Barry's Phantom, and also loved Wilson McCoy's Phantom, and have come to love Ray Moore's Phantom. I didn't love him in the early days, but I've certainly got a whole new appreciation for him now. I hear what you're saying about Jason's art. I don't know if the lack of care is necessarily the right word, because I think he puts.
I don't think it's that.
Yeah, I think he works very hard on every panel. It's just not quite for me, his style, in terms of a full Phantom story. That said, there are some pages that I absolutely love, and I think that he's drawn the absolute nuts out of, if I can use that term. But it won't suit everybody, and that's art. It's subjective, and what I may not like it, but the next person may just love it. So who knows? But I enjoyed the art, and things like a dark face and that sort of thing. I do see that as the shadows and that sort of stuff. But art is for different people, and that's in the eye of the beholder. So I wouldn't like to see Frew, and absolutely no offense, but I wouldn't like to see Frew suddenly use Jason for all of their stories. But I'm certainly happy for him to be in the rotation. There's no doubt about that. Yeah,
and I think it's important that we do get a rotation of different artists, because, like you said, people have different tastes, and it's good to be able to have different styles, because it can appeal to more people.
Yeah.
And if there's more people that are appealed to it, there's a likelihood that there's going to be more comics sold, which means we're going to keep getting more fan comics. So,
correct. And look, even just the fact that the guys haven't missed a beat in these unprecedented times and uncharted waters and all of the other cliches that are going around, they haven't missed a beat, and we've still been getting our comic every fortnight and all the rest of it. So exactly. We're very lucky.
All right, so moving on to 1865. Now, again, as we've said before, we're not reviewing 1864, which is the first part of the Fight with Singh, which is the 22nd saga. We're going to do a whole podcast on that, and that could be an interesting podcast. So make sure you listen and subscribe to us so you don't miss out on that. So this is a collector's replica issue number 23. Now, this has got some great stories in it. It's got the Scorpia Part 1 and Part 2, which now, if you've been listening to some of our other podcasts, the Scorpia and Scorpius, they kind of sound similar. And of course, the Scorpius is a series that creator Shane Foley is doing for the Phantom's Giant Size, which is like a sister publication for Frew. So that is based off this story in a sense. So if you've read Scorpius but haven't read Scorpia, make sure you pick up issue 1865 because Scorpia is a good story. I enjoyed it. And then the other story is the Phantom's Engagement, which is the Wilson McCoy version and not the Cy Barry version that most people would be familiar with. Now, I will admit the art scanning and printing in these stories is actually quite nice. It's crisp, it's not fuzzy. There's a lot of editing involved and stuff like in the originals, but there's been worse. Have you got anything you want to say about this?
I really, really enjoyed dipping back into this world, into Wilson McCoy's world and into the 1950s stories. I caught myself and I should have known better. I always tend to skip the message from the publisher because I don't like the spoilers and I like to get straight into the story. So I just opened this and read it. And because of the nature of their countdown, they've got part 2 of Scorpia before they've got part 1. And I didn't realise that. So I read part 2. You sort of pick it up and go, oh, this feels like a weird start to a story, but that's okay. I kind of know where this is going because I've read it before. And so that was fine. And then I get to the next part and I go, oh, that's right. This is part 1 of what I've just read is part 2. So it would have been nice for those to be in order in that sense, I suppose. Well, but look, I agree with what you said about the quality of the scanning and the reproduction. And I just really love Wilson McCoy's art. And I really love the simplicity of these old stories. So, and again, maybe it's a symptom of the times that I'm enjoying getting back to remembering what I loved as a child and that sort of thing. But I really, really, really enjoyed this particular replica series issue.
Yeah. So just something a little bit interesting. Issue 131, which is that cover there, which is the Phantom and Diana embracing, if you're listening to us on the podcast and not watching on the YouTube. That is actually one of my all-time favourite Frew covers. So basically what I'm doing is I'm not aiming to get Frew comics all the way to 1 because I'm spending my money on else. And what
on a mortgage and things.
Yeah. What I do is I only get Frew covers below 500 that appeal to me. And that's actually one of the covers that is actually on my wants list because it's a cover that I actually really, 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 really like. So it was a nice little kick, I guess, getting that. It's interesting you say they should have just done 132 and then 133. That just makes more sense.
Yeah.
No one would have picked up that the numbers were around the wrong way, but people would have got confused with the story. I also find it interesting in a recent message from the Phantom. No, in a recent letters in the back of a comic. I can't remember which issue it was, but one of the people actually makes mention that they should change the covers every 5 issues instead of every 10 issues. So I can't remember who said that, but that's something that we've been saying quite often. And Dudley, if you need a bit of a tally to be able to push you over the edge for that decision, put me down for changing this cover every 5 issues instead of 10.
Yeah, and look, I'll probably vote for that as well because as much as I love this this issue, and I think it's Clayton Barton is the artist. If you go for 10 issues in a row, that's 2.5 years at the ratio of 4 of these replicas per year. So it's just a long time to see the same cover come around. So I would probably vote for that as well.
All right, cool. So we're actually making good time, guys. I hope you are enjoying it and you're having fun. Remember, that's what this podcast is all about, and that's what the fandom is all about as well. Let's have some fun in time. So what we're going to be talking about now is the Frew trade paperback number 3. Now, I must admit, I had a real smile on my face when I saw that Frew release this. You know, it was just like, it just, you know, maybe I'm getting soft or something like that in my old age and having daughters, but it filled me with a nice warm feeling seeing this trade paperback. So you know, I liked it.
Why?
It's a great story, and then the fact that there's the a sequel, or the prequel that goes with it, which is following the tradition that they've already done, and it's presented nicely. Now, in my opinion, part 6 is probably the weaker story out of the 6, but it's still fun. You know, it's nice to get it in colour where Australians have only ever seen it in black and white. There's a lot of probably non-Australian readers that will probably pick this up as well, especially probably the Indian community, because it is in colour and it's of Filmang, and Filmang is quite popular over there as well. And I really, really like the idea of them publishing a collection of old or classic, or whether it's newspaper stories or Team Fantomen stories, and then creating a sequel or even a prequel to go with that. It makes sense to me. And, you know, and if you're looking on YouTube, you'll see behind me, I got a whole bunch of hardcover books and stuff like that. You know, that's something that I like. And so I really enjoyed it. And 2 thumbs up to Frew, from my opinion, for doing this.
Yep. Look, I would commend anyone to go and have a look at our YouTube review of this, because I filmed that probably last weekend. That was very much focused on the trade paperback as a product. And as a product, I stand by it. I gave that 4.5 good marks out of 5 last weekend. And it's a really solid product as a package, something you can put on your shelf. It's got those colour pages, as Jermayn has said. It captures a 5-part story that was probably seminal for us. It was around the time, I certainly remember buying these off the newsagent shelf. You might have had to go backwards a little bit to collect these ones, I think, Jermayn. But it was certainly a story that I remember coming out at the time. Talk more about the story in a moment, but the fact that I remember it from then suggests that I must have engaged with it pretty well. I'd be interested to know whether Frew are choosing which ones they put into trade paperbacks based on sales, or just based on the ones that they really enjoyed themselves. Either way, it's it's a choice.
I doubt they've got the sales back from 1994.
You wouldn't. It depends on how good Jim and Judith were with their record keeping. It's probably not in an Excel document. It's fair to say.
I reckon if it was written down on a bit of paper, so it probably got thrown out during the move.
Well, it would have existed though, I think.
But like, I could see Frew doing this more often. And I wouldn't want it just to be Team Fantomen stories. I like to see, whether they alternate it, like a collection of Team Fantomen stories and then a collection of daily or Sunday stories, or even a mixture of the two and all that. But publishing some of these old classics, and that's what the trades is, and what this, and what we've seen in the first two as well. It makes sense. And then the idea of creating new stories that can fill in a hole or whatever. And if you go through Lee Falk's stories, pretty much every single story, they're quite easily, probably 80% at least, quite easily there could be a prequel or a sequel in some form. Like I saw a panel today from I think it was the Phantom was riding after an adventure with the Golden People It was with the golden flowers, and then there was a previous Phantom that had the adventure, and so he's retelling the story, and all we see is like about 4 panels of a previous Phantom, and then the Phantom has a question like, what was that like, or something like that. So a quite easy sequel would have been the Phantom finishes that adventure, and then he goes into the Skull Cave and reads about the 4th, 10th, 13th, whatever Phantom who has that adventure, and that's. There's heaps of stories like that, and it's something I would like to see more.
Yeah, and look, to be fair, the trade paperback number 3, the Triads, is the first time that that Frew have extensively republished a Team Fantomen story. The first trade paperback was origin stories, and that included a mix of Lee Falk and Team Fantomen stories as they explained various elements of the origin of fandom. Elements and tropes that I've sort of mentioned already before. The second trade paperback was Lee Falk stories and sequels to those Lee Falk stories, which were brand new and written by, I think, almost extensively Australian creators. A mix of Australian and Scandinavian creators. And then we've got the Triad Saga, which is the collection of Team Fantomen stories with an Australian author writing that part 6, as you've already said. So they're mixing it up, and I wouldn't like them to see them get stuck in any one of those all the time. But the blend seems to be really effective at the moment.
Yeah. And I like the fact how they're in colour. The newspaper stories have been coloured. It's a sweet spot, and we've discussed this back in issue. Podcast 148. If we're going to get less regular issues and more of these, in my opinion, that's a good thing. Now,
so okay, that raises a question that came from one of the letters I'm pretty sure it was 1863, the second part of Inked in Blood. Someone suggested that rather than a comic every fortnight, that Frew go to 4 22-page stories per month, so they only end up issuing 12 comics. And Dudley, in his reply to that, he seems pretty open to the idea. So how would you feel if Frew dropped their fortnightly publishing schedule, went to once a month, but also had the trade paperbacks?
Okay, that's a good question. The only thing I would say not in favour about that is that Frew still make most of their sales through the newsagent.
And you need a turnover there.
Yeah, that's in a sense and in most businesses you have that service that pays the bills, that is your bread and butter, is what you build your business upon. And in my opinion, that for Frew, and I haven't seen the books, I haven't talked to Glenn, Dudley or Renee about this or anything like that, this is just my opinion, top of my head as you throw the question, I would expect their fortnightly comics to be their bread and butter, and then this stuff to be the cream on top, all the stuff that makes it a good year and stuff like that. So you're right, it's a good suggestion, but I would be cautious about it.
Yeah, I'd certainly be very sad to see Frew drop the fortnightly publishing schedule, because I do enjoy getting those comics once a fortnight, and to think that there would suddenly be only 12 per year if they went to go monthly, that wouldn't satisfy me.
No. It'd be like being on a diet. Just become miserable.
So the Triad Saga then.
Although our
what did you think?
News podcast might be shorter.
Well, that's true. That's true. Less to talk about every month. The Triad Saga then. What did you think about it as a story? I assume you've reread the 5 or the 6.
Yeah. So I've reread the 5. I enjoyed part 6, but you can tell it's not part of the original canon, or lack of a better word, of the original 5, because it's a different tone story. Parts 1 to 5 is intense. It is an intense read. There's people dying. There's people that you like that die. Like there's Glowing Lotus that dies. There's Colonel Weeks, or Patrolman Weeks's best mate that dies and stuff like that. And then there's the other the young Triads guy in part 1 that dies as well. These are all likable characters. They die, and so it is an intense read. It's probably something that you wouldn't, that you would question younger people to read. But
yeah, that said, I've just finished watching the Harry Potter series of movies with my 10-year-old, and anything that happens in there pales. The Phantom comic pales in comparison to what happens in Harry Potter. So
I don't know. I watched the first one and was bored, so I didn't bother watching the rest.
You'll get there as your girls grow up.
Hopefully not. I'm in My Little Pony at the moment. But no. So Triads parts 1 to 5 is very different than part 6. Like, in my opinion, and I just reread part 6 tonight, it's fun, for the lack of a better word. It's a and this is it's, you could probably say it's typical filmmaking in the sense that it's a fun, romantic 60s style story. The art, top notch. You cannot fault the art at all. I found it interesting, and I haven't looked at it closely enough to see whether, and I didn't notice anything, whether there was any editing or censoring, but I couldn't pick up on anything like that as I was reading it. So I don't know whether there was, but it all seemed above board. There was a couple of things with the storyline that was a little bit weak, like the fact that the Phantom carried around a lighter, and then he burnt the bush in page 192 to 194. That was a little bit flimsy in my opinion, but I had fun reading it, and at the end of the day, I had my intense parts in 1 to 5, and then I had some fun towards the end. So
fair enough.
Playing too much.
I guess again, this is probably the English teacher in me. If I was providing draft notes to the authors, and it's Claes Ramanthi for the first 3, and then Andrew Constant for the last one. If I was providing draft notes for those guys, there's probably 2 panels in particular that I'd have big question marks around, and one of them is for Claes Ramanthi in part 2 of the Triad Saga, and part 2 of course the 5 Thunderbolts. There's just a really glaring thing, which is about it's on page 63 of the trade paperback, which is about 20 pages into part 2, where the Phantom says, "Oh, it suddenly occurred to me that tattoo was the sign of the Triads." What do you mean it suddenly occurred to you? We're 20 pages in, he's going, "Oh, that thing that happened in comic 1, I've suddenly realised that's a big picture thing." So that was just a bit of it's a comic book jump, to go, "Oh well, there's a problem here and I've solved it this way." And likewise, I guess with part 6, which is Return of the Tiger Queen. Turns out that the Tiger Queen, who in part 3 quite clearly died, in part 6 they go, "Oh no, I didn't die," and that's it. That's the problem solved. So those 2, I guess, narrative jumps bothered me as an English teacher, I suppose. And I understand it, and it's a comic book world, and we just make that jump and we get over it, and that's fine. The other thing I'd say about parts 1 through to 5 is I would like to see the Phantom a whole lot more. There's 10 pages in a row that's just more exposition and what's going on behind the scenes, and we don't see the Phantom, and he just takes forever to come back into it. So I didn't actually, reading these 5 parts of the original Triads together, I actually didn't think they stood up as well as they did when they were published 2 weeks apart. and you probably forgave them those continuity things a little bit more than you do when they're all stacked up together like this. When the 5 parts,
You also weren't a school teacher back then either. You were
no, probably
a
not.
kid.
But when you look at these 5 parts together, you could take part 3, the Tiger Queen, out, and it would make no impact to the overall story arc. It doesn't contribute at all. She's not a member of the Triad's gang. She's just someone who tries to steal the weapons as they go through. It's almost an irrelevant part to the story. And by part 3 of 5, you should be really building towards a climax. And so, for that reason, as a whole, I enjoyed re-engaging with the Triads, but it probably didn't. I probably didn't enjoy it as much the second time as I did, as I seem to remember myself reading it back in the 90s.
Yeah, and I think that happens. I think that's natural, and it happens probably a lot of the time. Like if you pick up even a Lee Falk story that you would have really, really enjoyed as a kid, and you read it now, especially as a school teacher compared to a kid, you will pick up more on the plot holes, and then even doing the podcast as well. That's what we do. We look at things, we dissect things and stuff like that as well.
That said, I've just said the collector's replica. I really enjoyed revisiting that. So I do think that we all know Lee Falk's a genius. We wouldn't be here doing this podcast if he hadn't had a brilliant idea 80, 90 something years ago, and then written so many quality stories. It's very hard to walk in the footsteps of Lee Falk. Triads is a good story. I like the fact that it came together as a trade paperback. But I didn't. Yeah, the collector's replica series was quite an enjoyable dip back in nostalgia. I didn't get that same feeling from the Triads.
Fair enough. Well, I did. I enjoyed it a lot. Okay, now something.
Last thing that I should say, and I didn't put this up in the YouTube review, and I did that on purpose because I don't. The YouTube review, you're trying to be positive and not pick up on any of the negatives. I also, we need to be honest and forthright. This continues to niggle at me. It's the cover of the trade paperback, and if you're on YouTube, you can see me zooming in on the Phantom's belt on the front cover of the trade paperback. There should be a skull on that Felmang. There should be a skull on the belt buckle of the Phantom's belt.
I wonder how many. If this is the first time you've noticed that, let us know. Or if you noticed it straight away as well, let us know as well. It'll just be interesting. It's something. Once after we talked about that, I read a Phantom story. I can't even remember where it was, but they also had the belt, the skull insignia missing from the belt buckle as well. And so I had a bit of a chuckle with that. Felmang's obviously not the first person to do that.
No, and look, I guess in conjunction with that, there's a number of times through the Triad stories that the Phantom's skull ring is on upside down for whatever reason. And if he was to punch somebody,
for an uppercut. He's turning around because he knows I'm going to uppercut you. And then,
he's a quick thinker if he can manage that.
It's like was it Sherlock with Robert Downey Jr., that movie in it where he foresees how's the fight's going to go. It's simply a case of that. The Phantom's like foreseeing how it's all going to happen.
He's flipped his ring around.
I'm going to uppercut this guy, so I'm going to flip the ring upside down. So that way, when he gets skulled, it's the right way. Yeah, anyway, we have to talk about the President Kennedy's graphic novel. Now we've got, as this comes out, there will also be a video review of that as well. So you could review of that. Basically, again, very similar. That kind of talks about it as a general overview, and it's also just the one of us, in this case Dan, reviewing it as well. This is going to be a bit of a discussion with two of us going backwards and forwards like we just did with the Triads as well. Now, you happy for me to go first, or is there something you want to say before on top of your video review?
No, just to clarify that this is the Hermes Press trade paperback, which is a hard cover as opposed to the soft cover from Frew, and I was able to purchase this in about March, maybe late February of 2020 from my local comic book store, and it's certainly available also in off the web.
Yeah, and if you if you're in Australia or something like that, there's places like, you can always do it via Amazon or Booktopia and stuff like that. So now it's let me say up front that it's good that we've actually got this, because this has been kind of like the boogeyman or the Moby Dick type of for Hermes. Well, there's a couple of those, but this is out. The story is out. The story is printed. And people can actually read it after getting the first part and then having to wait a good year. I think it's even close to 2 years as well. Now, there's parts of this that I enjoyed, and then there's parts that I didn't enjoy. Now, I would give...
I'll talk to us about it as a product first, because that was certainly how my YouTube review went. What do you think of it as a book that you can put on your shelf?
Okay. If I was to give it 2 votes, so a vote for as a product and then a vote as a story, and then I'll give an overview. So as a product, i.e. we're talking about the hardcover, the care that's put into it, the back pages that's got the progress shots and stuff like that, I would give it probably a 4 out of 5. I really do like the way that they have put this together. There's care in it. There's a high attention to detail, which I like. It's hardcover. It's weighty. It's going to, if you get it posted, it will cost you a little bit extra. But unfortunately, if I was to give a vote on the story, I would give it probably about a 1. I'm probably, and again, I'm not sure if this is just because I'm tired tonight, but I've read it 3 times now to see if I can get it to change my mind.
Gosh.
I read it back in December. I read it when I thought we were going to discuss this back in 148, and then I've given it another read tonight as well. So I have done my homework on it. I have tried to not be just a reactionary type of person of it. I didn't like it at all. There's a few things in it. Now, Ron Goulart, he's a great writer. Now, I was talking to some other people, and they made the mention that it was very heavy in the dialogue, and I'm sure you're probably going to say exactly the same.
And Ron Goulart, we should say, was responsible for at least some of the Avon novels.
Yes.
So wrote those prose Phantom stories back in the 60s and 70s.
Yes. Now, he also wrote a Moonstone story as well. I can't remember which one it was. I think it was Treasures of Bengala, which was the 5th graphic novel. Now, that is also a very text-heavy comic. So it is his style. Ron likes using words. He'll probably be good on this podcast. Now, Sean Joyce was the penciler. Now, I will admit, I look at his pencils in here, in the back of the book. If you're listening to the podcast or if you're on YouTube, you can see it there. Now, his pencils are amazing. However, I look at those pencils and then I look at what has actually happened in the print quality. In my opinion, there's a stark difference. So at first, when I was reading this, I was rather negative against Sean. I still am, because there's still some aspects that I think he has stuffed up on. But I think a lot of the fault has to be on the inker. Whoever inked it did not do the pencils justice, in my opinion. Now, some things that I didn't enjoy this was there was a lot of excessive bum and lingerie shots. Like this one here on page 17. I just don't think that's necessary. And then there's when the Phantom talks to Diana. Next page. Again, is it really necessary? I don't really think so. And then there's ones when I should have written down the page number. I think they were at a cafe or something like that, or it was the secretary of the president or something like that, and she's kind of added in to the center of the panel, bending over or something like that for purely no reason at all. So,
well, those are Sean Joyce's choices because
Yeah.
he's when you've just praised him for the pencils, which I agree with. Those are his choices. So
yeah. And I did say that I'll give him a bit of slack on the inking, but
yeah,
I didn't like some of his choices on there. Now, I find it interesting. I don't know how to word this, so I'll just say it and it'll come out wrong. I'll be interested to see actually who was the editor of this story and whether it was Dan or whether it was his daughter. Because there's some scenes in there that I would expect a male probably to approve, but a female I would normally expect them maybe to pick up a little bit on and question it. Now, also at the start in the first one, the fonts are way too small, especially at the start.
Any of the narrative boxes in particular.
Yeah. It's really hard to read. It's really light as well. And so you're almost having to get your head right to it just to be able to actually read it. Now, there was a couple of other things that I wanted to pick up on. It's in the first part. This part here, page 16. So the Phantom's going to the American consulate. All right, this is the American consulate, and he's rocking up in his Phantom costume, walking down Main Street like he's in his trench coat. That, we talked about the jungle sayings, and we had a go at the writer for that. We need to have a go at the writer for this one, and also probably the editor. He should have picked that up and said, he needs his trench coat on. Sean, go back and redraw it back on.
No, the doorman says, "Welcome home, Phantom. Mr. Caleb is expecting you." So the doorman just knows, this guy. That's the Phantom. When does that ever happen? You're absolutely right. It's completely outside the Phantom universe.
And it's the American consulates. I would give them a little bit of slack if it was the Bengalan consulate or something like that.
Maybe.
I said a bit of a slack.
Yeah. I can see maybe how you could do that.
But this is the American consulate where Americans don't know or shouldn't know the Phantom, where Bengalans maybe a little bit more, I'm aware of the Phantom. But, Team Fantomen don't make that mistake. So that was a rather big boo-boo in my part. The other boo-boo, which is probably more, I'm not sure whether it's a colouring issue, and this is one that I must admit I had to double check this. Aletha, or the journalist, at the start of the story, she's African American. Towards the end of the story, she's a lot more Caucasian. So the editing again of that should have picked up on that and asked them to put to change the colours a little bit.
I can't say I noticed that, but honestly, by the end of the story, I was paying way less attention.
Yeah,
to be fair.
And I don't know what happened with the art, and this is where I do need to praise Hermes, because obviously the art styles has changed a lot from at the start towards the end.
The Sean Joyce is getting help with the pencils by the end, by part 3. Raquel Lopez is assisting on the pencils by the time we get to the third story.
And it's a pity because I could live with Sean Joyce's pencils and inks, but towards the end, the art was worse than the story. And
that's a big call.
And it was almost unreadable because of the art. I could live with the story, but the art towards the end was disappointing. But in saying all of that, you have to give credit to Hermes to actually seeing this through. It would have been very easy to say, it's too hard, we'll just release issue 1, we'll just leave it there. It's happened before. comic publishers have done it, and it could have just become one of those unique Phantom publishing, things that just never happened, and in 50 years' time we would have said, "Oh, what happened to that?" But they stuck through it, and you have to give them credit for that. But the product or the story is probably about a 1.
I cannot argue with much of what you've said. Honestly, it's no. I think you've summed it up really well. It was just so disappointing. A lot of the things that you've just picked up on were in issue 1, and a lot of the things that you've just shown us on the YouTube were in issue 1, and it was you were hoping then. You had a bad feeling in your guts then that it wasn't going well, but you were hoping then that it might turn around, and it just didn't. You're absolutely right in terms of it was overwritten with far too much dialogue, and I'm trying to get a fantastic page to demonstrate it. But even that, you can just see the amount of word balloons, four or 5 word balloons in a single panel. They're just covering so much of the art. You look at all the white bubbles across this 2-page. What a shame for the artist to have all of their work covered by so much dialogue, and it was ultimately so unnecessary. It was just extra reading you didn't have to do. You're right, the lettering made it difficult to read sometimes, particularly those narrative boxes. There were leaps in the story and just discontinuity amongst panels and pages that I guess we understand the reasons for that, because it was initially slated as 5 comics that were going to be 30 pages each, and ultimately we've ended up with a trade paperback that is, and I'm just flicking backwards to find the total page count of the story.
About 100.
Not even 74 pages is that's the last page of the story. It's bulked out with some those covers and that sort of thing. The progress pages, but 74 pages ultimately is the total of the story. So it's obviously been slashed and hacked and chopped and that sort of thing, and it hasn't been done with a view to the overall story arc. Well, maybe it has, but it just hasn't been successful.
I thought slashing it from 5 issues with what you said of, even if you just go 20 pages, which is 100 pages, down to 75, that's what about a third of the overall
25%,
story.
yeah.
25%, which is a quarter. I thought they did a good job in being able to condense it, so it actually kind of, I wonder if you read it, you would actually know that there was big chunks missing out of it.
I felt like you could tell. Maybe because I already knew and was aware of that, but gee, it was so jumpy in places.
Yeah, it was definitely jumpy. I also think there could have been, and it was an okay touch, and I could see it might have been all right in a 5-part, but the blossoming romance between the bad girl and the astronaut, it was a cute touch, but it had nothing to do with the actual Phantom story, and it took up probably 10 pages, and which meant that we had 10 pages of the story or the Phantom that we missed out on.
Yep.
So
yeah, look,
I would give it probably a 2.
I can't remember off the top of my head what I said in the video podcast, the video review of it as a product. I probably would have said around the 3.5, 4, I think.
I think
and even
3 or 3.5.
Did I? And to be fair, that was probably already affected by my knowledge of the story. I probably wasn't quite able, because as a product, it's really good. As a product, if it's on your shelf and you never open it, and read it, maybe just do a flick through. It's not too bad. The story art's bodgy in places, but as a product, it's not too bad. But I 2 out of 5 is probably generous for it as an overall package if you count the desire to actually read the story.
Some of the covers I really did like, though.
Particularly the one that I don't think we ever actually saw published.
Which is the astronaut, which is...
The Montauk, yeah.
Yeah, that one. That's probably my favourite of all of the covers, and you're right, it never got published, which is disappointing because I would have been very happy if that was on any of them.
Probably that double-page spread you just held up with the black and white version and the colour version is probably my favourite double-page spread of the entire book.
Probably the weakest cover, and probably the cover I have the most issues one, is this one here, which is...
I couldn't even get my G.I. Joe dolls to stand like that if I tried.
Which is just a bunch of condoms, a bunch of walnuts in a condom, really. But no, I enjoy, look, I'm glad it came out. I've already read it 3 times to try and give it a...
I'm really impressed that you've read it 3 times. I've read it once. I read issue 1 and then I went through and read the trade paperback as a whole. And I don't think I'll ever do that sort of damage to my brain again.
Fair enough. So now...
And that's really harsh, and I apologise to the good people at Hermes Press. But just the overall story just was a big letdown. Now,
some people may think that it's quite easy to can stuff, behind a microphone and all that. Just setting the record straight. My feedback, which I've just said, I've actually given that feedback to the people at Hermes. They gave me a copy to read late last year, and they asked for my feedback, and that's basically the feedback that I did give them. So, if someone thinks I've been a little bit harsh, I have been harsh to them as well with my feedback. One thing, I've been rereading some Moonstone stories recently with our podcast that we did with Mike Bullock recently and stuff like that. One thing that I think that they did do well, and this is probably the thing I'll finish up, is if there's publishers out there that are doing new stories, i.e. Hermes and stuff like that, they need to get a Phantom consultant or someone who understands the Phantom to kind of read or look at the stuff before it actually goes to publication, because Moonstone would have not made those mistakes because they had people like Ed Rhodes, Pete Claus, and also Brian Shedden, who's the Australian, actually looking over everything before it actually went to print. So they were sent stuff, and then they made, and I know they made changes because I've talked to them about it. Frew has Glenn Ford as the editor, who's a fan since the 60s. Let's go with the 60s. So he knows the Phantom. So mistakes like that wouldn't have gone through. And Costa Ramofu has been writing Phantom stories since the 80s and stuff like that. And I know he's involved. They've also got Andreas, and there's some others and stuff like that as well who read over stuff as well. If someone's out there and they are thinking about creating Phantom stories, do yourself a favour and get a consultant, a Phantom consultant. Most people would do it for free because most of us just love the Phantom and we want to see good stuff. But get someone out there to have a look at stuff before it goes to print, before it goes to pre-production, because there's some mistakes in there that could have been fixed with someone looking over it before it went.
Yep.
And that's
100%.
not me or us promoting ourselves to get a job. That's purely because if someone does that, we get a better product, which means we enjoy it and other people enjoy it as well. Okay, so now if you've enjoyed our reviews and stuff like that, or if you haven't enjoyed our reviews and you think I've been a little bit negative and you want to tell us that your opinion, you can do that via our social media and stuff like that as well. So we will tell you the links about that in a second. But I just wanted to let you know that we are more than welcome to hear you give us feedback on our feedback of Phantom stories. So, Dan, anything you want to touch on that I haven't said before? Otherwise, we'll go straight to the outro.
No, just to encourage people, if they're listening to this and they haven't jumped on board with the card game Kickstarter, by all means, head across to that. We didn't say it at the time, but I'm sure we'll provide a link to the Kickstarter in the show notes for this episode so that you can just scroll down and jump on that. At the time of recording, Sweden is leading the way by about 3-1 in terms of backers, and Australia is a sad third at the moment behind American supporters as well. So I'm a bit surprised that Australians haven't jumped on board a little bit more. By all means, it's backed. It's going to be made, and we've seen enough and talked to Mikael enough to know that he is ready to go. It's just a matter of getting the funds to send it to the printers and press go. It will happen. There's not the risk with this one now. It's ready to go. It's going to be quick. So I'll Mikael, if you're listening to this, I've now just staked my reputation on your efforts. So make it happen. But anyway, yes, if you're listening to this and you haven't backed it in yet, jump on the link in the show notes and support the card game.
Yeah, and even if it's just because you're an Australian and you want to get one over the Yanks or the Swedish, and if you're from those places, you might want to back it to keep us Australians down, so you can hold one over us as well. Absolutely, patriotic pride going. So no, we thank everyone for listening to our podcast. We hope you enjoyed it. We hope you had fun. We hope if you're stuck in isolation, or you're stuck at a job, or you've been swapped, or whatever, have some fun. Listen to our podcast. We hope that you enjoyed it. If this is one of your first podcasts because you've jumped on board because of another reason, or a Kickstarter, or whatever, you can subscribe to us on our iTunes account, or if you're using an Android phone, you can also subscribe as well. Now, all of this is possible purely because of our Patreons. Now, one of Dan's jobs in the next 2 weeks is that he is going to be updating the Phantom Preservation Project. So that hasn't been done for 5 months.
There was a Bushfire book in the meantime. To be fair, and conversation without notice, I have done some stuff behind the scenes in the last week to try and get that ready to go, so it's easier to just press go on that one. But yes, it is going to happen shortly. Yeah,
so for those who are eagerly waiting new updates, please accept our apology. Please have some more patience. Dan's also having to work a little bit extra with the pandemic as well, but he has been warned. It will be done very soon, and we'll put up a link on the website as well to letting people know about it as well. So basically what Patreons are is people that help support us. They give us a little bit of their money once a month, whether it's from $1 to $5 to $10 or even $20, basically, and that goes towards the support and running of the website, of hosting.
All in American dollars, we should say.
Oh, yes, it is in American dollars. So it's double if you're Australian.
At the moment.
So it all basically helps us run this site and helps us buy software for the website and all that type of stuff. All that stuff that costs money, basically it helps us. And it also has helped us to be able to send a Patreon gift. So every single Patreon member has either received or are about to receive cards that are related to the game. Have you received yours yet, Dan?
No, I haven't, which is a bit disappointing because I know that people in the United Kingdom have received their game, received their cards, and yet here I am just in the same country as you, and they haven't arrived yet. So I am looking forward to seeing them, and that'll be a nice little teaser for the card game.
Yes, so basically all our Patreons are getting a card, and basically that can actually be used in the game.
And new Patreons will be eligible for that card as well, I'm sure, until such point as we run out of cards.
Yep. So yeah, basically. We've also used a couple of the cards for prizes. We've got a couple of other competitions coming up, but basically they're for Patreons. So we actually have 4 new Patreons since our last Comics and News podcast, which is pretty cool.
That's awesome. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, so thank you. So let's just give them all a shout out. So we've got Paul Mason, who we all know, and we all thank you for his support. Ty Browning, who's a good old WA boy. Keith Bennett, he likes to swap between New South Wales and Victoria. And then we've also got Ewan McCauley, who is the Lightning Strikes creator.
I'm going to have to correct. It's Owen Macaulay.
Owen Macaulay. So it is good to see some creators. We've got a couple of other creators besides Paul and Owen. So it is good to see the supporters that are actually, the creators actually supporting us as well. So we give them all a huge shout out. Patreons, we can't do this without you. We hope you enjoy the card, and because let's face it, not everyone's going to get one of those cards. There's only a couple of those cards that were made and printed, and Patreons get the first dibs because we love our Patreons. So if you want to learn more about our Patreons, you can go to our website, which is chroniclechamber.com. If you want to buy one of our books, you can also go to chroniclechamber.com, which is the Bushfire Phundraiser book. If you want to email us and give us some of your feedback, or you want to discuss something with us, that is chroniclechamber@gmail.com. Or you can you can talk to us via social media, which is on Facebook. If you like Facebook, you can search chroniclechamber.com. If you like using Twitter, we are at chronicle_tweet, and Instagram, we are at Chronicle Chamber. As I said before, you can subscribe to us on iTunes or apps like Podbean, Player FM, even Spotify and stuff like that as well. So I hope you had fun tonight or today as you listen to this. We hope you might have agreed or disagreed with some of our feedback. That's all good. Dan, thank you for joining us, and thank you for your time. And till next time, happy Fantoming.
Absolutely. Happy Fantoming, guys.
500 years ago, he washed ashore the sole survivor of a shipwreck. And upon the skull of the man who killed his dad, he said, I'm mad, I must eradicate piracy, injustice and cruelty, and all my sons will follow me, so evildoers will believe that this man cannot die.
The Phantom,
The ghost who walks,
the Phantom,
enemies beware, the Phantom's always there, but you won't find the Phantom. He finds